My father didn't even glance at me before he did it. He simply slid a heavy envelope across the mahogany table and said my sister's name as though it carried weight in every syllable. Emma had returned home after 8 days away. I had carried my parents' expectations for over a decade. My mother's small nod carried the authority of a gavel in that silent room. I didn't protest. I didn't even flinch. I set the guardianship papers beside the house keys, the clink of metal loud enough to echo off the walls. Everyone assumed I was yielding, but when Emma unfolded the note I left for her, she couldn't digest it at first glance. She simply couldn't. I grew up in corridors smelling of lemon disinfectant and faint carpet polish, fluorescent lights buzzing steadily overhead. My father strode ahead with purposeful steps, greeting staff and residents alike, his presence a kind of quiet announcement. I followed, small and awkward, maneuvering wheelchairs far too big for my hands, tiptoeing just to keep them aligned. The metal rims would rattle, and he'd glance back with a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Steady, Lucy," he'd murmur. Then he'd turn back, performing for whoever watched. Emma never followed. She floated through rooms, skirts swaying, hair catching the sunlight, her laughter pulling attention as if gravity itself obeyed her. My mother staged photographs, placing her in perfect frames by holiday garlands or flower arrangements, captions that praised our promising future. I sometimes appeared in the edges, half-cropped, holding a clipboard or mopping up unnoticed spills. Even as children, the division of roles felt deliberate. Emma got dance recitals, summer programs, weekend art camps to unlock her potential. I got responsibility. "Lucy's independent," my parents said, as though independence were innate, not cultivated through years of silent labor. When Emma complained about homework, a tutor appeared. When I brought home straight A's, my father merely nodded, eyes on his laptop. "Expected of you," he said. I remember one birthday vividly. Emma's cake had candles that sparkled, balloons floating high, relatives pressing in with smiles and applause. Mine, a couple of months later, was a store-bought cake, frosting uneven, edges slumping on the counter. My mother kissed my cheek and reminded me to change into my uniform before heading to the care facility for an evening shift. I was 16. That shift wasn't optional. The bills weren't optional. I didn't resent Emma. She wasn't the one who set the rules. She simply thrived under them. I learned early that desire made me a burden, so I stopped asking for anything. I organized medication drawers, folded towels, helped residents pen holiday greetings. I became invisible work, the kind that erased the need for praise. By the time I reached adulthood, the pattern was unshakable. Emma moved to the city, chasing a career in digital media, a dream my parents celebrated as if it were sacred. When she called, it was usually about money, and my parents sent it without question. Meanwhile, my father's health declined, followed by my mother's. The business wavered, staff quit, regulations tightened, and when crises came, the one they relied on wasn't the daughter they invested in, it was me. I signed the power of attorney on a cold vinyl chair in the back office, the clock reading 1:47 a.m. My mother's gaze steady, as though she had anticipated this moment for years. "You handle the heavy lifting," she murmured softly. It wasn't a compliment, it was a decree. I didn't argue, I didn't flinch. I simply set the pen down, the paper trembling slightly under my fingers, and folded it precisely. Some nights, after long shifts, I caught myself in the facility's glass doors, posture straight, hair tightly braided, tablet clutched against my chest. In those reflections, I looked less like someone in her 20s and more like someone who had already lived a decade's worth of responsibility. I realized then that this space, these walls, this weight, were never optional. They were assigned. The early cracks came slowly. A minor email about staffing schedules arrived with Lena's name in the header instead of mine. Then the quarterly reports, which I had meticulously prepared, appeared under her signature. A meeting I had scheduled for operational updates went unnoticed until a nurse asked why Lena would be leading the discussion. I remember standing in the supply closet, the air biting cold from the refrigeration unit, hands wrapped around a box of linens. My phone vibrated. A photo from my mother, Lena, hair lifted by the breeze, standing in front of the facility's main entrance with a practiced smile. The caption read, "Next in line." I stared, letting the glow of the screen dim across my face. Another message appeared, a formal invitation to a family celebration, embossed gold lettering on cream cardstock. No mention of me, no consultation, just a gesture neatly folded into my mailbox, like a ritual I was meant to accept. That evening, I entered the kitchen. The scent of roasted garlic and simmering tomato sauce hung in the air. My father leaned on the island, discussing long-term visions with Lena, gesturing at charts and floor plans. My mother listened, nodding, eyes bright. I waited. Nothing. When my father finally acknowledged me, he offered a distracted half-smile. "Lucy, you don't need to worry about administrative duties now. You've done enough." The word enough lingered. Lena, poised, arms crossed, seemed to belong on a stage rather than in the room. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My fingers curled around the edge of the tablet like a lifeline. My mother touched my wrist. "You're good behind the scenes. Let her shine." Behind the scenes. Those words fell heavier than any reprimand I had ever received. Later, I found another folder on the dining table, charts and financial plans drafted in Lena's handwriting, numbers inconsistent, projections improbable. Yet my parents' initials marked every page. They had made their choice. I sat on a chair, scraping the floor quietly, breathing thin and even. I studied the papers, letting a quiet smile form. I didn't correct her. I didn't complain. I merely closed the folder and returned it to its place. Each step upstairs felt weightless, as though I had shed gravity itself. In my room, pale blue walls dimly illuminated by the tablet, I began recording everything, a timeline of crises, staffing shortages, inspections, compliance freezes, every emergency I had managed, every protocol I had written, every contract I had safeguarded. The system didn't need me to defend it, it needed me to document it. By sunrise, I drove across the empty streets, mist curling above the asphalt. I parked outside Dr. Allen's office, the lights warm against the gray morning. He didn't ask why I was there. He merely stepped aside. The office smelled of cedar and paper, a calm permanence that mirrored the truth I was about to present. I laid the files on his desk. He reviewed silently, glasses slipping down his nose, turning each page as though weighing the unseen weight of my work. He said finally, "They're moving without you, and you've stopped asking to be seen." His words struck, but I only nodded. He added, "You don't need revenge, you need structure." That afternoon, Miss Rowland arrived with her leather portfolio, the kind of calm only decades of experience could produce. She skimmed each document I had brought, the contracts, the compliance logs, the emails, even the power of attorney papers, and her lips pressed together whenever Lena's hasty calculations appeared. "They're planning a transfer," she said finally, "but they don't understand what's being transferred." "Explain it to me," I whispered. She pointed first to the licenses. "This is the backbone. Without these, the buildings are meaningless." Then the compliance protocols I had designed. "This is intellectual property. You created it." And finally, the partnerships, the operational networks, the trust between inspectors, caseworkers, and medical staff. Institutional capital. It follows the system, not the names on the door. I sat quietly, letting her words settle. We spent the next week constructing a legal framework, a non-profit entity meant to hold everything that mattered: the system, the protocols, the data, the partnerships. Nothing for appearances, everything for preservation. Harbor Gate Foundation. A bridge, I whispered silently, for those who needed stability more than recognition. Using my authority as power of attorney, still valid, I executed each transfer with precision, methodically and without emotion. My parents, believing it was routine housekeeping for their legacy, signed advisory roles without reading fine print. Ownership, control, authority, all had shifted without their knowledge. Returning to operations, I moved silently through the halls I had maintained for years. Staff acknowledged me with quiet respect. They had known who had kept the ship steady when the tides of absentee leadership threatened to capsize it. Lena floated through, notebook in hand, suggesting color schemes for newsletters and displays. My parents beamed with pride every time she smiled or gestured. That evening, I remained in the back office, drafting a letter for her. Calm, factual, clear. No accusations, no anger, just an explanation of what she was inheriting. Titles without the underpinning structure, responsibility without preparation. I folded the letter into a crimson envelope, striking without noise. 3 objects accompanied it: the envelope, the keys, the power of attorney. On the day of the celebration, the house shimmered with soft light, crystal glasses and linens folded like careful promises. My parents stood near the head of the table, radiant, while Lena perched between them, posture impeccable, every gesture choreographed. When my father spoke, the room hushed. "We honor the future of our family's work," he said, eyes bright with pride. "She's ready to lead." My mother's nod confirmed it. She deserves it. I waited until the applause dwindled, then placed the 3 objects deliberately on the table: keys, envelope, power of attorney. The metallic tap of the keys cut through the room like a signal. "Kara, this isn't necessary," my father said, confusion flickering across his face. I slid the envelope toward Lena. "It's all yours." Guests smiled, assuming grace. Others noticed the shift in stillness, the subtle pause that demanded attention. Lena unfolded the letter, eyes scanning, expression changing, confusion, disbelief, panic. "This can't be right," she whispered, voice trembling. She read further, hands tightening on the paper. My parents, blindsided, tried to intervene, scanning through pages that outlined brand protocols, operational licenses, and the non-profit's control. "Kara, what did you do?" My father's voice broke. I remained calm. I didn't defend myself. I only allowed the system, meticulously preserved and documented, to reveal itself. Hayes, the family attorney, finally intervened, his tone measured. "This arrangement protects the residents and staff. It's not punitive, it's structural. All transfers were executed under full legal authority, verified by third parties." Lena's posture faltered, realization settling. Ownership of the buildings, the programs, the reputation, they had control only over appearances.
The substance had been quietly secured years ago. For the first time in decades, I felt a lightness. Responsibility had been honored, preserved, and now detached from expectation. The room buzzed with disbelief, and yet I walked away, quietly, letting the consequences speak for themselves.
The night settled into the house like a soft, heavy blanket, and I stayed in my old room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The red envelope lay beside me, its contents already unfolding in Lena's hands, and, more importantly, in her understanding. I opened my tablet and scanned through logs, reminders, and reports I'd left pending. Even after years, the system required constant attention. Yet tonight, I felt different. The weight that had pressed against my shoulders for so long seemed to loosen. I wasn't carrying anyone else's expectations anymore. Morning arrived with muted gray light filtering through the thin curtains. I dressed quickly, the quiet hum of the neighborhood barely disturbing the early hours. Driving to the new Harbor Bridge Center, I noted the familiar streets, the awakening city, and how life had continued outside the household orbit I had maintained for so long. Inside the facility, volunteers moved gently through the hallways, setting up activities with a care that reminded me why I had devoted myself to the work years ago. Notes from the piano tuner drifted across the halls, like soft punctuation to the routine hum of preparation. I stepped into my office, small, almost anonymous, but functional. The morning light fell across the desk, the stack of folders neatly aligned, awaiting my attention. Emails began to trickle in. No panic messages, no urgent calls, just the natural rhythm of operations. The system was alive, functioning as I had designed, independent of the family dynamics that had shadowed it for a decade. Staff passed my office quietly, nodding in recognition. Lena entered a few minutes later, pushing a wheelchair with the care and attention that seemed uncharacteristic of her usual posture. She didn't notice me, and I let her. She had her moment, small and careful, in the structure I had built. I returned to my desk, reviewing schedules, budgets, compliance logs. Every line, every note, every procedure I had created years ago remained intact. Later that week, my parents appeared in the Medicaid office, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. They did not notice me walking past, and I didn't pause. There was no anger, no need for confrontation. The detachment was liberating. I was no longer bound by invisible threads of expectation or duty. Responsibility had been transferred, preserved, and protected, but I had no more need to carry it. At the Allied facilities, I observed Lena in motion, moving a resident from chair to chair, adjusting blankets, offering water. Her movements were careful, deliberate, small. The spotlight was gone, and she was learning, fumbling but present. I allowed her this moment. Her lesson would come through experience, not inheritance. The realization of structure versus appearance settled over me, like the soft light of dusk. She was learning the weight of titles and the importance of frameworks. That evening, I walked the quiet halls of the main facility alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a combination I had come to associate with responsibility. I stopped outside each room, listening to laughter, conversation, the gentle rhythm of life moving uninterrupted. My presence was almost invisible, and yet I felt connected in a way I had never allowed myself to feel before. I sat briefly in the nurses' lounge, reflecting on the years I had spent carrying burdens quietly, invisibly, but faithfully. It had been exhausting, it had been lonely, yet it had been necessary. Finally, I returned to my office. My tablet lay open, the letter to Lena still in the envelope. I reread the words: clarity,
structure, responsibility. Not blame, not judgment, just truth. I placed the envelope back in the drawer and exhaled, releasing the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time, I felt free of obligation, yet intimately tethered to the work itself. I had preserved something larger than family pride, larger than appearances, something enduring.
Days turned into weeks, and life settled into an unexpected rhythm. I moved through the facilities with purpose, but without the old tension. Staff approached me less for guidance and more for confirmation. Volunteers, residents, families, they treated me as part of the foundation itself, not a family member stepping into a role. The Harbor Bridge system had become its own entity, independent yet thriving under the invisible scaffolding I had built. Lena's presence remained quiet, careful, almost tentative. She attended meetings, took notes, and shadowed staff, her previous confidence replaced with curiosity and hesitation. I didn't interfere. This was her lesson in reality. The inheritance of a name without preparation can be intoxicating, but I had structured it so that experience, not assumption, would guide her. Occasionally, she glanced my way, as if seeking reassurance, but I maintained a neutral presence. She had to discover the weight of responsibility firsthand, the slow accumulation of knowledge and accountability that no family legacy card could convey. One morning, I arrived to find a volunteer struggling with a new software update. I paused, observed, and quietly guided them through the steps. No one called me heroic. No one sought applause. It was enough that the system functioned, that knowledge transferred, that care continued uninterrupted. That night, I returned home and realized that the house was still quiet, but differently so. Not empty, not oppressive, just free. Free from expectation, free from invisibility. I could exist without the constant friction of familial roles dictating my worth. My parents reached out occasionally, asking about minor administrative issues. I responded factually, concisely, without emotion. They were no longer gatekeepers, nor did they influence operations. The subtle shift was almost imperceptible to them, but to me, it was liberation. The foundation I had built, safeguarded and nurtured, was beyond their perception. It could not be undermined by pride or oversight. Structure outlasts emotion, and I had proven it. One afternoon, Lena came to my office. She placed a folder on my desk, hesitant, her eyes searching. Inside were proposals she had drafted, attempts at improvement. She looked up, nervous. I tried to follow the system. I nodded, scanning the documents. There were errors, gaps, miscalculations, but also signs of effort, learning, engagement. I gave her quiet guidance, pointing out missteps, explaining logic, protocol, and procedure. She listened, attentive, absorbing more in one session than she had in years of inherited authority. Slowly, carefully, she began to understand the meaning of stewardship over spectacle. Evenings became my own time again. I read, wrote, and reflected, untethered from the invisible expectations that had dictated my movements for over a decade. The Harbor Bridge Foundation ran on its own, its heartbeat steady and reliable. I could finally witness the work flourish without having to carry the entire weight myself. I had built more than a family legacy. I had built an enduring structure that served people, not appearances. Months later, during a site inspection, I observed Lena successfully navigate a difficult situation.
a scheduling conflict, a miscommunication among staff. She managed with small confidence, no flourish, no spotlight, only the diligence she had slowly absorbed. I allowed myself a quiet smile. The lessons were hard, the path unseen, but she was beginning to understand. The system would teach her what words could not. That night, I returned home and placed my tablet on the bedside table. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened. I had carried responsibility silently, invisibly, but now the work carried itself, and I could finally exist alongside it, not beneath it. The legacy was no longer a chain, it was a bridge. I closed my eyes, not in exhaustion, but in relief. I had preserved what mattered, allowed others to learn, and finally reclaimed my own life. For the first time, the story belonged to me in its entirety, yet it belonged to everyone who relied on it as well. Freedom was quiet, structured, and enduring.
In the end, no outbursts echoed, no slammed doors, no sudden confrontations, just a quiet boundary, drawn clean and certain. Families collapse in noise, but limits settle softly, like dust refusing to be swept away once you stop pretending the weight rests solely on your shoulders. Freedom didn't arrive through conflict. It arrived through stepping back, letting the system breathe without interference. Sometimes the most powerful statement is silence, and sometimes the quiet that follows holds more truth than any words ever could. If this story resonated, stay near. More are coming.